the talk tonight is basically an idea that I came up with from thinking about the connection between the challenge and question of the week, like I often do. But it mostly came about because I give you guys a challenge of the week every week in the dojo, and if you're a student or you follow us on social media, you know this. And challenges are for you to challenge yourself and do them, not for you to hear this week's challenge is 1,000 sit-ups or 1,000 units of ab work. And people hear that, and they have one of a couple of very few reactions to that. The first, probably most common reaction is, I can't do that. 1,000? It's crazy. 1,000 is impossibly big. I'll die if I try to do 1,000 sit-ups. And then they think, well, maybe I don't have to do it all at once, which is true. You have the entire week to do it. And you say, well, I'm not going to do that. It's going to take too much planning. It's going to take too much. I'm just not going to do it. And that's fine. If you absolutely are fine with the way that you are right now, and you don't hope to improve in any way, shape, or form, then you don't need to challenge yourself at all. And if you can sense the disdain dripping from that statement, then you should get the meaning behind that. Of course, we should all be happy with who we are right now. Of course, we should love ourselves. Absolutely. And one of the ways that you can get to love yourself and appreciate who you are and what you're capable of is to challenge yourself. If you hear a challenge and the first thing that you do is make yourself small, that's not a sign of self-love. That's a sign of self-pity. That's a sign of self-doubt. And look, some of you, if you asked your doctor, should I do 1,000 sit-ups this week, would say, no, you shouldn't. But that's probably not very many of you. And if you're not sure, ask your doctor. And if you bring me a note from your doctor that says, this student cannot do 1,000 sit-ups, it will be detrimental to their health if you do it over an entire week's period of time, great. Give me that, and I will say, you shouldn't do these sit-ups. But let's be real. You hear the challenge, and your initial response comes from the ego, right? Unless you really get yourself into the right state. You meditate, and you clear your mind, and you connect to your highest self, and then you open your eyes, and you immediately start scrolling through Facebook. You're like, how can I get out of this meditative state as quickly as possible? Let me look at social media and see what's going on in the world. And then you see the challenge and you go, 1,000 sit-ups. You know what? I believe that I can do that because I know what I'm capable of as a human being. It's something that's beyond the ego and deeper and larger than that small self that I identify with. It's not usually how it goes. So I want to explore the idea of, rather than us having the foresight or the convenience of only being challenged when we are connected to our highest self, what happens when we're challenged when we're not our highest self? And how can we use that challenge to find our highest self? And that's about as far as I got with planning this talk. So let's see how the rest of it goes. I had an idea to pull quotes from Jonathan Livingston Seagull. If you guys haven't read this, it's wonderful. I was just polling my class here watching on Zoom, which the class contains 6 people who I thought for sure would have read this book, and nobody has. We have it in the dojo. It's a great book. And This book is not about birds. If you read this book when you were very young for the first time like me, you're like, oh, that's a nice story about seagulls learning how to fly. And none of you have read it, so you're not going to get how funny that is. But when you read it, you'll go, haha, I get why that's funny. This book is about something more than that. And one part of it, an aspect of it, a piece of it, is this idea of finding yourself through challenge. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull is a seagull. And he decides at some point that he's going to just like try to be more. And I won't ruin it for you, but basically he embarks on this quest to perfect his flying technique. And it has a lot of parallels to our martial arts practice and our meditation practice. And one of the quotes, the closest thing that I could find that pertains to what we're talking about, is a quote from one of the characters, and I didn't mind who the character was who said this, but you read the book, you'll find it. Quote is, "We can lift ourselves out of ignorance. We can find ourselves as creatures of excellence and intelligence and skill." And that's nice, right? And I absolutely believe that we can all do that. This quote is in the context of seagulls. And seagulls, we as human beings probably assume them to be ignorant. And I think seagulls, in this book, the characters kind of assume themselves to be ignorant. And the whole point of this is, of course, that we as human beings are also ignorant and are just like seagulls. We kind of see ourselves in a certain light, and we limit ourselves in this way. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull saw other birds flying and was like, I think that I, even as a seagull, can be faster and better and achieve something that is higher than the limitations that I have put on myself or that the world has put on me. And when you start a challenging endeavor, you'll start to find yourself confronted by these limitations. You'll find yourself very much crammed into a little box and feeling like, I can't do this. And maybe the confrontation that you find is, I don't want to do this. One of the hardest things for people to do is to be okay with transcending what we are now, who we are now, because we have to rise above and become something bigger and stronger. That growth is scary and difficult. And one of the hardest things about it is once we have grown and we become capable of more, we have to take responsibility for that. We have to realize, like Uncle Ben said in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you recognize the power, if any of us really recognized the true extent of our power, if we allowed our limitations to drop down and we just found ourselves in this infinite space of ability, capability, power, we would have to really be confronted by the fact that we're not doing what we're really able to do. We are not reaching our highest potential. And that first step is so confronting for people and so difficult for people that oftentimes they just stop there. You think like, oh, I could do this, and oh, I don't want to be able to do that because then I'm going to have to do all kinds of other stuff. If I can do that, maybe I'd have to, save the world someday. And we experience that as kind of a pressure, and we experience that as a real challenge to who we believe ourselves to be on a deep level that's troubling to us, right? We like things the way that they are because we know ourselves and we know what the world is like when it's this way, when it's small and easy. And then as soon as we have to step into this bigger possibility, it's scary. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what awaits us. So we should recognize that this is something that we have certainly done before. Most of you listening to this talk know how to walk. And so when you were a child, and you didn't have all this baggage, and you weren't so sure about what you were and who you were, you looked at other people walking, and you're like, I could probably do that. And you got up on one foot and just fell flat on your face. And you were like, oh, I guess it's not that easy. But you're still kind of dumb when you're a kid, and so you just keep getting up and trying again and again and again, and then eventually you can walk. And it's like, of course you can walk. But if you try to do something like that as an adult, you'd give up in a second. You'd give up right away because you're so sure about those limitations. You're so sure about how far you can really go. So this is part of what we want to just blow up through our martial arts, our meditation practice, is any kind of limiting concept of ourself. And it's no small feat. It's difficult. So let's take the challenge of the week this week as a simple example. 1,000 sit-ups. Let's just say that you're doing 1,000 sit-ups. You hear that number, and sure, your first response is, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, or that's too difficult. Maybe some of you hear that, and you actually know full well that you can do it. Most of you, if you get to that reaction, it's because you've already done it, or something like it, or something more difficult before. And great, but you're not being confronted or challenged by the physical part of it. You're being challenged by your incredible ability to just say, yeah, but I don't really need to push myself this week. There's a lot of smoke in the air and it's hot out, so I'll do that some other time. And we want to recognize wherever that comes from. If it's an excuse to not push ourselves, recognize that. That's the ego, and you can listen to that part of you, that small part of you, or you can ignore that and try to take it on anyways. And I am going to suggest to you that whatever that initial response of resistance is, or confrontation, is exactly the purpose of the challenge. If you hear the challenge of the week and you say, I can do that, and then you just do it, well, it wasn't a challenge of the week for you. Congratulations, you're already a giant. And for all of the rest of you people who hear the challenge of the week and you get stopped or resist or whatever it is, you are who the challenge is for. It's not for the people who can do it and who know they can do it and then they just do it. It's for all the rest of you. And yes, I'm talking to you. You are the person that 1,000 sit-ups this week is for. Because there's really something for you to get from doing this. And I had a Tai Chi student this morning tell me, he's like, Sifu, my abs are killing me. I did 60 yesterday and that was it. And I said, great. If that is what you can do, that is the challenge for you, then that's what you do. And if you can do more, do more. If you do 62 days in a row and you can't get out of bed the next day, I guess you challenged yourself and you did it, and now you know that you can at least do that many, and now you know that you can push yourself to that extent, and then rest and then pick it up again and do what you can do. It is in this initial response to the challenge, I think, that we first start to get a glimpse of our highest self, what that could be, by first maybe realizing or coming to terms with recognizing our lowest self. Our lowest self, that ego that is so quick to give up and give in. And so how does recognizing your lowest self find your highest self? Well, it's yin and yang, right? You know what this is down here, so you say, well, if I want to find my highest self, I'll just find what the opposite of that is. That's it. If your lowest self says, I'm going to be lazy and just sit here today, and just think about doing 1,000 sit-ups, then you want to connect to your highest self, you do the opposite. And this is like such a dumb, simple idea that I'm sure that all of us can make this happen. Maybe you don't get tripped up by your lowest self in the first instant of it. Maybe you actually think like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Sifu shamed me enough last week. I'm going to actually try the challenge of the week this week. I'm going to do it. And then you start doing it. And then in the process of it, you connect to your lowest self. And you get to that place where you're like, I can't do one more. I can't do this. I refuse to do it. I don't feel like it. I shouldn't have to do this. And you notice how that, that little baby part of you comes out and starts being in charge. That whiny part of you. When I was a kid, I was in the back seat of the car. My parents were driving, and I got this idea in my head. I'm like, I want a hamburger. I'm like 8 years old. And I say, I want to go to Stars. Take me to Stars. And my parents are talking to me like, what is Stars? What are you talking about? I want Stars! And I'm crying, and I'm yelling, and my parents have no idea what in the hell I'm talking about. And then finally, I think we get home, and TV turns on, and a Carl's Jr. ad comes on, and I'm like, Stars! That's what I want! And it's funny because I was literally in the back seat crying and whining, and my parents, as adults, had to make the decision of, well, I don't have to listen to this, so I'm just going to keep driving, and that's what they did. And you might find yourself, going in this direction. You're 100 sit-ups in, and your little baby whiny self starts to be real loud and very convincing. And you can put that whiny self, which is the ego, in the front seat and let it drive and say, okay, you're in charge. Okay, you're in charge. You say that we're not doing any more sit-ups, we're done. That's it, that's fine. Or you can let that part of you stay in the back seat, and you can listen to it and say, okay, it's all right, and then just keep going. Keep driving, keep doing those sit-ups. It is a difficult thing to do and a very important thing for us to practice, because it's not really a natural thing for us to do. The natural thing for us to do is to give in to that impulse, to give into that impulse to want things to be easier and to want us to stay small. So this is always an opportunity that's there for us. This weekend, I'm going to knock on wood, as long as the weather holds up and there's not too much pollutant in the air and whatever, I'm going to run my triathlon. This is my first triathlon, and this is a Olympic length triathlon, which means essentially I shouldn't be doing it. It's way too hard. And I was training for it earlier in the year, and the pollution happened, and COVID happened, and they canceled the triathlon, and so my training partners were like, well, I'm done. I'm not training for this anymore. And so, of course, because part of me was, attached to my training partners, I was like, well, obviously I'm not training anymore either. But I also said that I was going to do the triathlon, and because I told all of you that I was going to do it, obviously I have to do it, because I'm going to look not super inspiring if I just give up on stuff that easily. So COVID, smoke, whatever, it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen this weekend, it will happen. But I went out and I practiced last week because of my bum ankle. I haven't been running actually pretty much at all to train for this thing. My thinking being that I'm just going to gut it out and just run, and it's going to be rough that day. But some of the people I know who have done triathlons in the past said it might be a good idea for you to try running a little bit before, because if you get out there and you're already super exhausted and your ankle just gives out, you might just seriously hurt yourself. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I last weekend I got on my bike, and then I started running, and it was brutal. It was hot, and I was wearing the mask the whole time. And I really appreciate what you guys do on these days when it's outside, it's hot, and you're breathing in the mask. It is rough. And of course, it took my brain, 5 steps before my little baby whiny ego was like, you can't do this. What are you, stupid? You're gonna get hurt, you can't make it. And so I said, all right, well, I've heard from you before, so I'm just gonna put you in the back seat, I'm gonna keep going. And it started off rough in 5 steps, and I just kept doing it. It was rough the entire time. I was not really running. And I just ran, I ran I guess it was a 5K, a couple of miles and came back. And I'm not very good at running. And everything kind of hurt while I was doing it. But I was able to do it without very much of that process going because of my practice in martial arts and my practice meditating. So my Black Sash test, well, first I'll talk about the Red Sash test here. The meditation part of Red Sash is 2 hours long, and that was one of the most grueling, painful experiences of my life. For those of you who haven't heard it before, I had this genius idea of sitting on a beanbag chair, which is what I had been practicing sitting in, and I sat totally still. I was really doing great for the first half hour, and then my body was kind of settling into position on this beanbag chair, and my hip got into this incredibly painful spot where this feeling where you have to kind of like pop your hip. Well, I couldn't move or I would fail the test, so I just sat there. And the last full hour of the meditation was excruciating pain. I was not meditating. I was sitting there, breathing through the pain, and convinced that I was going to vomit from the pain and fail the test. And I just sat there. And at the end of the test, Stephen Brown came in and let us out of the meditation, and I just flung myself off the beanbag chair and writhed in pain on the ground. And he asked me, how was your meditation? I said it was the worst thing that I've ever experienced. And I was being dead serious. It was awful. And I can do anything after that. Fast forward a couple years, several years, to Black Sash test. Black Sash test is the test itself is a week long, and it's super brutal. And part of that test is being essentially beaten up by 5 people at once. And another part of that is just doing forms, nonstop cardio essentially for like 3 hours straight or 4 hours straight. And I find myself in that situation. It's like, this is in some ways worse than anything that I've experienced before, but I've dealt with this limiting factor. I've dealt with this ego before, and so I'm just going to push through it. And during the test, somebody punched me in the ear and perforated my eardrum, and it was like, this is all that I need. I've got 5 people hitting me right now, and my eardrum blows out. Have you ever had that happen before? It's not, it's invigorating, but not in a good way. It makes you think like, this is bad. The first time that happened to me, I thought that something had seriously broken in my head. But it's disorienting, and it was the only time that I have sworn in the dojo. And I wasn't proud of it, but I also wasn't that unproud of it because it was rough. And I just got up and finished the test, and it was terrible. At the end of the test, you can see some of the pictures from my test. I've got a black eye, I've got tape on several areas of my body, and I'm just like, walking like this until it's time to do something, and then I stand up and I do it right, and that's it. But this, you don't have to have gone through that level of difficulty in a test. You just have to have been tested in some way, been confronted by it, and then moved beyond that confrontation. Run up against your limitation and move beyond that limitation. So this was all kind of going back to a second place that you might find your lowest self, where you start saying to yourself, I can't do this. I am sure that I can't do this. And then, again, you just go to the opposite of that. I can, and I know that I can. I've done this before. I've done something like it before. I felt this way. I've had this experience. And so I just go in the opposite direction of the lowest self. Literally just think the opposite thoughts. And when you connect in that moment to the possibility of what you can actually do, in this case with your body, maybe in your mind, with your emotions, with whatever it is that you're being challenged with, when you connect with what you are able to do, it only takes a moment And in that moment, you know what that feels like. It is ultimate freedom. And this might feel like, you've got your second or third or fourth wind in a really difficult physical experience. Or you're basically letting go of all of those limiting thoughts in the moment, and it just feels like the weight is off of your shoulders and you just go. If you experience that for a moment and then you lose it again, that's okay, that's what happens, and then you just come back to it. You connect yourself back to that feeling. And it might literally just be taking one more step or doing one more sit-up or whatever it is that you're doing, one more breath in meditation without moving. When you connect to that action, or you connect to that thought, or you connect to that feeling, that's your highest self. You have found your highest self. Your highest self is that which is limitless. It is not small. It is not confronted by anything. It does not recognize confrontation. And in these moments of challenge, or in these extended periods of time of being challenged, is oftentimes where we can really connect to our highest self and know what that is like, and then hold on to it so you have it again in the future. If you are living a life that is free of challenge, one of two things is true. You are either an enlightened being and you have transcended all of this and you don't see any challenges because you've already arrived at your highest self and you're there permanently, which would be really nice. But probably what's actually happening is you're just not challenging yourself. Maybe you see the challenge of the week and you say, I don't have to do that. And you let yourself off the hook like that. In that moment, what did you just miss out on? You missed out on a real opportunity to find your highest self, to connect to that which is much larger and greater than who you believe yourself to be. So, you might get that opportunity in tonight's meditation. You're going to sit, and at some point you're going to want to get up and move. You're going to want to just say to yourself, it's been long enough, I've been meditating enough. Or maybe you'll be totally fine with sitting there and just having kind of a lazy meditation. I'll sit here and just let my mind do what it does. I'll just let it wander and think, and I'll just let myself get caught up in whatever train of thought I get caught up in, and not try to actually, focus or discipline my thoughts or anything like that. Whatever that looks like for you. That opportunity is an opportunity to connect to your highest self and be there. And in meditation, it is really nice if we get there by transcending the ego, by just allowing those thoughts to fall away from us, to allow those attachments to fall away from us. But we might have to get there through challenge. We might have to get there by running up against that wall, feeling that limitation, and then saying, instead of having the normal response to this, instead of letting my whiny ego drive and be in charge right now, I'm going to do the opposite thing. My ego wants to be lazy. My ego wants me to give up, even if it's just in this moment, for this breath. Okay, I will just do the opposite of that. Find my highest self through the challenge. And if this talk has not convinced you that you need to do the challenge of the week, you've not been paying attention to the talk, or you've just convinced yourself about how tiny you are. And that's perfect, because now just do the opposite of that. Sit comfortably.